Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Primand's webinar. Today we're going to talk about how to migrate your data center to the cloud using Azure Migrate. My name is Tõnis Tikerpää. I'm a head of partner solutions here in Primand. And today with me is Sergei Sokolov, cloud infrastructure architect in Primand. So during this webinar, you have opportunity to ask questions by writing. And in the end of the webinar, we're going to look those through and trying to give you the answers to those questions. Okay, before we start, I'm going to do a little introduction about Primand. Primand is located in 3 countries, in 3 Baltic countries. Altogether, we have about 100 employees and more than 400 service customers. Primand is offering IT services for companies. So we're covering a full circle of IT services, starting from the end user support, server support, IT projects, merging and acquisition, IT consultations, trainings, and therefore business process automations, analytics, and so on. So yeah, those are the full IT service circle that we're offering for companies all over Baltics. And we are known as Microsoft experts, and covering all the, starting from the on-premise services, servers, and so on, to the cloud, Microsoft 365, Azure, and Power Platform. Today we are going to talk about more about Azure, but also, yeah, we have lots of experts and certified specialists on all Microsoft areas, including Microsoft 365, also Power Platform, including Power Automate, Power Apps, Power BI, and so on. And we have nominated 6 times already as a partner of the year, Microsoft partner, country partner of the year. So yeah, a lot of knowledge about this area. And today's topics. Migrations to cloud. What is driving? There is several drivers forcing us to think and move towards cloud. For example, data center contract expires. You need quickly integrate acquisitions. You have urgent capacity needs. It's difficult to get this capacity on premises, so in cloud it's much easier. If you have software or hardware is out of date, you need to refresh it. Then there is always reasonable to calculate and think about what it will cost and how it will perform in cloud. Security threats. There is a lot of security different solutions, and this is especially nowadays it's very important to think about it. Is your on-premises environment secure enough, or do you need some kind of extra security layer? Is it reasonable to move your information to cloud, or build up this hybrid scenario that you will get some security features from the cloud, even for the on-premises environment? Compliance also, there's a lot of compliance demands maybe for your environment, and it's there's ready-made like solutions for that in Azure, and probably most important maybe it's the application innovations. If you are building or trying to rebuild or re-architect or the services, it's all the solutions are maybe new solutions are available in cloud more than to start them to build in on premises. And yeah, software end of support also in some cases it's also the case. I'm talking about that also a little bit today. Why do you choose to migrate to cloud? One thing is optimize the cost. In cloud, you will pay what you use. You don't have to buy all the hardware and software in advance, but more use and pay what you are using. You can turn off your servers during the night, for example, if you're using VMs, or you can build up all the environments using app services, platform as a services. Not so much anymore that you don't have to build up their big virtual environment there. Lower the risks. Also, there is security features like advanced threat protection built in Azure, and a lot of other solutions there also. Always need to think this through when you're starting to build in Azure. Yeah, I'm going to show you where to start also a little bit later to go through the security layers also before you start migrating. And the innovation part also, as I told, it's very, very important, I think, and you can also win there from cost, from the performance, from all the opportunities you can get from the cloud, not so much from the on-premises anymore. Okay, but where you can save directly if you are moving your virtual machine, for example, migrating your virtual machines or SQL servers to the cloud, to Azure. One thing is you can pay as you go what you use. Then there is for those who are using, who already have licenses on premises, and its licenses are covered with software assurance. They can use the same licenses in Azure. It's called Azure Hybrid Benefit, and you will already able to save about 49% of the costs. And even more, if you will start using Azure reserved instances, you will kind of say that, okay, those virtual machines is these configurations is good enough for me. I will use this virtual machine for 1 year. Let's say, okay, I will close it for 3 years. Then I can also gain this from the price and get even up to 80% discount from pay-as-you-go model. Yeah, and you can, if you're using these reserved instances, you don't have to pay actually in advance 1 year or 3 year. All in one amount you can actually pay monthly. It's just smaller amount of invoice. Yeah, and then the extended security updates also for if you have older Windows Server or SQL Server and you will move it to Azure, you will get free extended security updates for no additional charge. Also, in some cases, it's also important. Okay, how can we move to Azure? Probably you all know this models. There is, if you're running servers in on-premises, you have to buy and manage all the hardware, all the virtual layer, software licenses, and so on. But now, if you're moving to Azure, there is two main options. Is it like infrastructure as a service? You will move your virtual machines to cloud. You don't have to worry anymore about hardware and virtualization layer, but you will have to deal with the operating system still, security updates, and so on. Or it's always reasonable to think about, can I run it, this solution as platform as a service? So you only, then Microsoft also, you don't have to worry about the operating system, the updating, and so on. Microsoft will offer you this platform. For example, we are showing you also this SQL Server databases and so on. So it's much more easier for you. Not so much. You don't have to manage it so much. It's lower risks about, I don't know, all the updates and security updates and so on, the backups, the high availability configurations. You only will deal with data and application on top of that. And if you are talking about SQL Server, then the options, is the like three main options. For example, is either you will migrate the server fully virtual machine to the Azure, like infrastructure as a service model. But I think it's not reasonable nowadays. You more have to choose between either managed instance or SQL database. There is two options, and we will show you both ways. Also, how to like run assessment with those, and what's the difference between managed instance and SQL database there in Azure. Okay, as I mentioned, cost savers are the hybrid benefits if you have the licenses already. We covered with software assurance. Then there is the reserved capacity. You will reserve your virtual machines or instances for 1 year or for 3 years. You can pay still monthly based. And there is also options for dev and test environment. You will get it's much cheaper than the live environment. If you will have the Visual Studio subscription dev and test, then you can run your development and testing there before you go live with that, and extended security updates also, as I mentioned. So here is also one comparison about SQL Server database using hybrid benefits, for example. You will get 55% cheaper price there. And you can even run those environments simultaneously, like for 180 days for the system, like for migration period, for example, to get all the SQL servers and databases to Azure. Where to start with Azure Migrate assessment? First thing, as I mentioned, also is like it's very important, all the security and so on, how do like baselines, how to set up the Azure environment. I would recommend you to go and read about Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework for Azure. It's explaining how to get started, how to build up the baselines, networking, management, all the management part, and so on. So it's a very, very important thing where to start. At the beginning, you may think, all right, I have only 1-2 server services, but during the time it will grow, and then it's very, very important that at the beginning phase you will build up the baselines correctly. So that's where to start. Okay, and about Azure Migrate, what are the main activities you should do, or how to do it? The first thing is to set up the prerequisites and ensure both environments have the needed permissions, on-prem and cloud. Then second phase is set up an Azure Migrate project, including the tools for assessment and migrations. Third is download the virtual machine appliance and deploy it in VMware environment or Hyper-V on if somebody has still, it's the physical environment to discover virtual machines and dependencies. We will show you how that's done. Then the fourth one is the review the assessment and dependencies from the Azure Migrate while scoping the target migration. This is also we will go through today. Fifth point is replicate virtual machines from VMware into Azure storage. Then test virtual machines using test virtual network. And if that's done, everything is working fine. Then the last part is to migrate virtual machines into productions using a production virtual network already. All right. And those are the quick overview about how to get started. And now Sergey will do the quick demo also how it really it's really done and how it looks from the Azure side.
All right, yeah. Let's first take a look at our so-called on-prem environment. So we have one vCenter server here with just one virtual host and just a few virtual machines. 3 of them are Windows and one is Linux. So there is an application server, a SQL server, Microsoft SQL, and just so-called general purpose server. To initiate the whole process, we first go to the Azure portal and we search for Azure Migrate service. Of course, it's already been installed here, but once you select it, you will be presented with this screen. So first of all, you need to choose the virtualization platform. So in our case, it's VMware. And there are these steps you need to complete to initiate the discovery and assessment. So first of all, you give a name to this appliance, and it will generate a key. And then you need to download the appliance itself. You can have this in this OVA format that you can just import to vCenter. Or if you want to install it on some existing VM, you can just download this zip file here. And once this OVA is installed, you can RDP into this virtual machine, and you will be presented with this web page. So this VM runs web service using this port number, and automatically it will start checking for the prerequisites. So if it has connectivity to Azure, if time synchronization is in place, so if there are all the latest updates installed into the appliance. And you would need to download one small zip package called Virtual Disk Development Kit from VMware's website and just copy this to this location. After that's done, you register your Azure Migrate appliance using this key that you generated here previously. You log on using your administrative credentials in Azure for the subscription, and you can proceed with the discovery process. So the first thing would be to enter credentials for your vCenter environment. In our case, I chose an administrator account, but actually it's not required. You can have a read-only account with just some additional permissions for guest operations in the virtual machines, so you would be able to assess them. So after entering the vCenter credentials, you enter the address or IP address of your vCenter. I should mention that standalone ESXi servers are not supported, so you need to have vCenter for that. Once the vCenter has been added, you can provide some credentials for your servers. So the appliance would use those credentials to connect to the virtual machines and do the software inventory and dependency checks and gather on all the informational roles of the VMs and all the information that is required. So these credentials can be Admin credentials, Linux credentials, just the local Windows credentials, and SQL credentials. And the appliance will use those credentials like one by one to try to connect to all the VMs that you want to assess. Yeah, so, and the last step would be just to start the discovery process by pressing this Start Discovery button, and after several minutes, you can go back to Azure portal and see that you will have some discovered servers here. So we can select those and see that we have here these servers. The appliance was able to see what the applications are installed in each of the server, which roles they have. And additionally, you have a possibility to install dependency agents. Those agents are like optional, but they are very useful. So you can see the dependencies between all your virtual servers. You can see what applications, what services are communicating with other services, what are the client connections to these servers. So this will help you evaluate all the requirements for the migration. So you migrate all the necessary servers at once and do not lose like connectivity between them. The dependency agent, actually, there are two installations. One is Microsoft Monitoring Agent, so it's called MMA. For that, you need to create Oms Workspace. Let me show it to you. This Oms Workspace is a part of Log Analytics solution. And you just go in here and you can see you can download agents both for Windows and for Linux. And all you need to provide to this installer just is the workplace ID and the primary key. And you install this monitoring agent, and there is another installation of a dependency agent. Dependency agent does not require any configuration. It's basically a next installation. So let's go back to Azure Migrate. Yeah, and once the servers have been discovered, the next step would be to create a group. There is a create a group button here. So you would typically want to group your servers together. Of course, if you have just a few servers, you can just create a group and select all of those. But if you have more, then probably it would make sense to create these groups based on, I don't know, department or some role or application role. So yeah, you can have those groups created from the discovered VMs. Just give it a name, and you can select the purpose of this group. So there are different kind of scenarios. One is for VM assessment, for Sql assessment, and there are also these kind of assessment like app servers. It's for ASP.NET web applications, and Microsoft private cloud solution for VMware, so-called AVS as well. So I have already created some groups for these servers. Let's see. These are the groups. So one is just some general servers group, and there is one group for SQL, just with this SQL Server in it. Let's select this servers group, and as you can see, you can check, the server names, if the dependency agent has been installed here, and some additional data. If they contain SQL instances, web applications, and etc. And from this bar here, You can view assessments, but the next step would be create assessments based on these server groups and view dependencies. Well, let's just take a look at the dependencies. So the dependencies are being drawn by service map functionality of log analytics. Of course, it's in our case, it's just a demo environment that's basically idling. So there are no active communication between those servers, but still, as you can see, there is a map of services and some connections that each server is generating. So as you can see, there's this, for example, this server runs 30 different processes, and some of the processes are using certain ports to connect to other external or internal resources. So that's a very useful thing to have to get a complete overview of your environment and to make better decisions for migration. Yeah, so the next step is to create an assessment, just give it a name. You select the assessment type, and there are several assessment settings that you need to use. You can create as many assessments as you like. So to compare the total price of those and to see which recommendations Azure would be making under different conditions. So of course you need to select target location, the data center first, and then in the storage type. So either you want to let Azure decide which storage type is more appropriate for your VMs, or you can select some specific disk types like premium SSDs, HDDs, or standard SSDs. And here you can select, if you want to have any reserved instances for your VM. So for now, let's select no reserved instances. And there are two sizing criteria. One is performance-based, so the appliance would use would measure performance metrics for each VM. In case of VMware, it will happen in 20-second intervals. It will measure CPU load, memory usage, disk utilization, disk IOPS, and network bandwidth. And it will use that information to create so-called data points. Each data point will be created in 10 minutes. And then using this information, it will provide you with the assessment results. For the performance history, you have 3 selections, 1 day, 1 week, and 1 month. So depending on which performance interval you want to use. The percentile utilization can be left as is, like 95. So it will ignore all the possible peaks that will go over 95%. Typically, they are not significant, but you can select different values in here. For VM sizes, as you know, Azure has a lot of different VM sizes, so you can select all of them, and Azure will try to evaluate all those types. But if you know for sure that you don't want some specific VM times to be included in the report, then you can just exclude them, like high performance compute, maybe some others, and just leave only those types that you're interested in, if you've already compared those. And there is the comfort factor. By default, it's 1. It means that the performance data will be evaluated as is, but if you know that it's kind of a buffer. So if you, for example, there is a good example in here. So for example, if you have a 10-core VM with only 20% utilization, so over provisioned VM, then it will result in a 2-core VM, which should be sufficient performance-wise. But if you select the comfort factor of 2, then it will result in 4-core VM, so it will double the resources for that VM. There is licensing. program, yeah, typically it would be pay-as-you-go subscription. There is an option for dev test environment and enterprise agreement. So you select currency, and sometimes you can be eligible for some discounts from Azure. So it would be additional discounts for you. And in case you've selected no reserved instances, so you can evaluate those VMs. For example, you have some VMs that do not need to run 24/7, but would only work like on, let's say, working days. So we can select 21 day per month. And maybe you just want to automatically schedule them to start and stop to work only during the working day. So maybe you want to include only 10 hours per day for those VMs. Yeah, but if you, of course, select reserved instances, then these options are not available. And the last thing you need to consider is if you have Windows Server license with software assurance, you can minimize cost by selecting that one. Okay, once the assessments have been created, you can evaluate the results. So I've already done some assessments made. Here's on the list. There is a useful thing to check here is confidence rating. Confidence rating, you would typically want to have this marking 5 stars. That means that the appliance was able to collect all the data points for performance. As you can see, if we select on-premises as on-premises criteria, that these confidence ratings are not available. That 5 stars means that the appliance was able to collect 81 to 100% of data points. So the result of the assessment should be as good as it can be. If there are 4 or less points, then you need to see why this confidence rating is lower. Maybe this VM was unavailable for some point in time. So that's something you need to double check. Okay, let's select, for example, this one. So after evaluating all these 3 VMs, that says that only 2 VMs are ready, and the third one is also ready, but with some conditions. In our case, this is I don't know. For this particular server, it for some reason detected that it's not known operating system, but here, as you can see, it's Windows 2022. Maybe there is some specific thing about this newest version of Windows Server. For Windows Server 2019, as you can see, it's readily available. If this assessment becomes out of date, then you would see that it's been marked as outdated, and you can recalculate it this again by just clicking this recalculate assessment button. And you can export these assessments into Excel files. Let me open it. So yeah, the results can be exported for your additional overview.
Yeah, I can show you the Excel files. 1 second. If you're doing the export, actually the same information is in your Azure portal also, but if you can, as Sergey mentioned, you can do several different assessments, trying different, I don't know, selecting different target virtual machines, different, for example, SQL Server, you can choose either you will go to the managed instance or database solution and so on. And for example, those assessments you can download and then try, go through those together with your stuff and see which one is the best solution for you. Before starting the migration. For example, those free virtual machines, pay-as-you-go assessment was, you can see from here, as Sergey mentioned, also 2 machines are ready to go to Azure. One is not ready, but I think it was just because it's 2 new operating system, 2022 Windows Server, then probably there was some kind of mistake there, but I think the migration will be successful there. You can see the cost, monthly cost, for example, what is the compute cost for computing and cost for storage. You can see the storage part separately here. All the assessed machines. You can see all the IP addresses and then the memory, CPU, storage, and so on. Disks by type, standard or premium HDD. So you can see, disk information more specifically here. It's important for your system administrators and assessment properties. And if we are taking this first one, assessment was pay-as-you-go, monthly cost. And now the second assessment was about if we will go with free year like reserving those machines for 3 years. And you can see the difference here. It's like 71 euros against 136. It's like then you can play with those. You can do the assessment for 1 year, for 3 year, and so on. And let's take a look for SQL Server Excels also. What was the assessment results there? Let's take, for example, I can maybe open if we choose the SQL Server assessment. If we would go with managed instance like approach, it was the cost was, for example, moving from on-premises SQL Server to managed instance solution to Azure. The cost was 400 euros. If we are going with pay-as-you-go, also here is the all information, detailed information, but probably one big most important part is always how much it will cost there. And if we will do the other assessment for 3-year reservations, let's take a look the results there, and we will see if we will go to the same managed instance approach to Azure, it will cost 180 euros. So it's very important. And also you can play with that. Is it like, do you reserve those instances, VMs? Can you use some licenses? Okay, if this is not good enough, you can play with different types of all the storage types, resource types, and so on. So this is very good, like tool to play with before you will start the migration, or just even you don't have to start migration. You will do just this assessment. Then you know at the situation you have at the moment, and then probably maybe you will have to start really migrate in about half a year, because I don't know, then the hardware will get old or whatever. Then you know kind of what will be the cost, what will be the opportunities. Is it ready? Is it easy to move, and so on. So those are the opportunities. Okay. Do you want to show something more?
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Let's switch back. Okay, so you have these assessments made, and the next step would be to start replicating the VMs. So you select Replicate button here. And again, you need to select a virtual platform. the appliance. You can, of course, have several appliances for different environments. And there are options to choose from. Either you want to migrate some specific VMs or apply migration settings from the assessments. So you can select the server group that you've previously created and the assessment. So selecting this assessment will create the virtual machines that were suggested and recommended by Azure. And for now, we just will select this single VM. Let's say this one. Of course, you need to have some resource group created beforehand, where these all resources will be located, and a virtual network with some at least one subnet. All the settings can be left as default. The only thing you have to choose either you already have a legible Windows Server license or not. Let's say we already have this license. Creating next. So while I've chosen the manually the VM, then I can select also which VM type I want to have for this one. So there's a long list. So I can see I have 4 cores and 8 GB of RAM. Maybe I can sort it out. So, okay, I have these types of VMs I can choose from. So I'll take this one. 4 cores, maybe. Doesn't matter for now. OS disk, yeah, it's one SCSI disk. Just let's press next. If you have several disks, you can of course select either you want to replicate all of them or just adjust some specific ones, and you select disk type, whether it will be standard, HD or SSD. Premium is not available for this for this particular VM type. Okay, you can assign tags for this one. It's always a good idea to assign tags to your resources, VMs, and others. And after reviewing the settings you've chosen, you can start the replication process. Of course, the replication process will take some time. The appliance will create a snapshot of your virtual machine, replicate the data, and will keep on replicating it once per hour. So after that, you will see those VMs that you've replicated. In my case, I have 2 of them. And by pressing these dots here, I can see what I can do with them. So definitely you want to test first if this VM can run in Azure. So we can select test migration. After doing that, Azure will create a clone of your VM and start it. And you would see this VM. I've already started one test migration for this Linux VM. So it runs as VM. It adds this dash test name to this one. And you can log in there and check if all the applications have started or the VM can boot up fine. Of course, consider it's a clone. You wouldn't want it to have any conflict on your existing production network. So for these kind of tests, it's advisable to have some kind of isolated network that you would only have like inbound connections to, limited, like only SSH or RDP. Or you can have a different option. It's called Azure Bastion. So you can use RDP and SSH connections directly from your web browser. Okay, let's say this machine runs fine and we are ready to migrate it. So I go back to my replicated VMs list. So I can select cleanup test migration, so it would remove this clone VM. And after that, I can start the migration process. So in this case, it will shut down the original VM, replicate the remaining data, like Delta, and it would start the VM in Azure. And that would be it for the migration. Now let's talk about SQL migration. So for SQL, the process is a little bit different, of course. So I'm going to log in first to my SQL Server. Here I have Management Studio opened, and I have several databases. So two of them are AdventureWork databases. Those are unknown sample databases by Microsoft that you can download for each version and test with. They are small, but already have some structure and some data. So for testing and demo purposes, they are quite good. Then there is an application called Microsoft Data Migration Assistant. It's a small download from Microsoft. You can install it either to your SQL Server directly or to some other server that will be able to communicate with the SQL Server. And it provides you with these two options. So first of all, you want to assess your databases. Let's some name here, assessment 1. For the assessment type, you can select either database engine or integration services. So in our case, it's just a database engine. Source server type is SQL. It also supports connecting to SQL servers running in Amazon. Okay, SQL Server targets server type. We're going to see how it looks, how the migration looks for Azure SQL database. So there are other options like manage instances and SQL Server for Azure virtual machines. But if you select, for example, manage instances, it suggests you to use Azure Data Studio. So Azure Data Studio, yeah, is the correct tool for this kind of migration. You need to install data migration service in Azure portal, and this Azure Data Studio can have different extensions, and one of the extensions is targeted for these kind of migrations. But in our case, we'll just concentrate on this regular SQL database migration. Let's create the assessment. So there are two types of checks it would run: compatibility checks and feature parity checks. Let's press next. Here now I need to connect to my local SQL Server. I would use Windows Authentication in this case. Yeah, it has detected I have 4 databases. Let's select all of them and add those to the list. Now I can press Start Assessment. So it shouldn't take long, and okay, it's already been done. If I want to check for compatibility issues, then I can see that there are non-compatibility issues in our case. But if you have some kind of specific issues that you need to address, then this tool will provide you with exact descriptions of these possible issues. Some of them you can address before the migration, and some of those can not be that important, and you can address them after the migration. And yeah, this tool will provide you with all the information, links to some Microsoft articles, and etc. So it will assist you further. And okay, now we have our assessment made, and we can upload this to Azure. We'll connect to the Azure environment. I would have to provide my credentials for the Azure subscription. And once it connects to Azure subscription, I select this subscription and the migration project. In our case, it's separate projects created in Azure Migrate. And I will press upload. Yes, it didn't take a lot of time, so the assessment is there. And if we take a look at it, it's also here under these Sql assessments. You have several of them, and you can evaluate on those different options. So you can see all the details and targeted platforms like SQL database, or if you're targeting to managed instance, you can have this assessment here as well. And of course. Okay, and how the migration process looks like, you go back to this migration assistant. And this time you select the migration project. Migration 1, sources SQL, target is Azure SQL. And you can select either you want to just migrate schema or data, or both schema and data. I will select both for now. Now again, I have to connect to my local SQL server. And I would let's use this database. I don't need to perform any additional assessments anymore. Press next. Now I can connect to the. Yeah, I forgot to mention one thing. Of course, before you migrate SQL databases in Azure, we have to create a SQL Server. So you just search for SQL Server. It's a platform as a service solution, and this SQL Server will host all your databases. Again, you need to select the resource group, provide some name, provide allocation for that, and you can select which type of authentication you would use. So there are two options: SQL authentication and Azure Active Directory authentication. So as it's cloud service, there is no possibility to authenticate using your local domain credentials. So in this case, I would use just SQL authentication, and I have already created such service here. And here is the name. This is the name I would need to connect to. So if I go back to my SQL server, I can use either SQL Management Studio or Azure Data Studio and connect to it. So I put the name in here, use my authentication. And now it's connected. And yeah, before you migrate to the SQL database, you have to create an empty database in Azure. And for that, I also have created a couple of databases here. Those are empty ones. So I would use this particular one to migrate my this AdventureWorks data. I'll go back. Go to my wizard. Now I can select my server name. I authenticate. And I'm requested to select an empty database that I want to migrate the data to. Okay, in this next step, I'm selecting all of my schema objects and generate a SQL script. This is all automated, so as you can see, just have to click next mostly. And there is the script ready, and I'm ready to deploy this schema to this new database. Okay, now my schema objects are deployed, and I'm ready to migrate data. So there are the following tables. But to speed up this demo, I would just select just 3 tables here. Start Migrate Data. So yeah, for those, it didn't take long, and I have this data migrated. So yeah, you would use this kind of migration if you have just standalone those SQL databases, and you can allow to have some downtime for your applications because as you can see, this is kind of a lift and shift migration. So you need to stop all the connections to your original database first. Then you perform the migration either during off work hours or maybe during the weekend. And then you reconfigure your application to connect to the new SQL database. The other option to use Microsoft Data Migration Service, it would allow you, it's a little bit more complicated process, but it would allow you to have less downtime. This process needs to have Azure managed instances, SQL managed instances. It doesn't migrate to Azure databases. And the basic idea of this process that you would create backups of your SQL database, full backups and transaction log backups. It would constantly update those transaction logs, and once you're ready to migrate, then the service would create the last so-called tail log backup and migrate all the data to Azure. So it would allow you to have minimum downtime for your applications. So that's basically how this SQL migration looks like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. As you see, we ran through all those, almost all those points. How to build up the environment, create this assessment first, then you have time to think through, calculate which way to go, then you will do the test migration, and after that everything is working, you will do the real production migration. It's not so difficult, but the first part is very important. How to set this up, do the assessment, think this through, test it, and migrate. All right, and there is actually one, what I wanted to talk about also is one program from Microsoft side. One thing is you can do this migration assessment by yourself or with partner, with Primand. And also there is opportunity to do. Microsoft is offering this solution assessment for different type of solutions also. There is Modern Workplace, Azure, Data Analytics, and so on. It will consume like how it looks like. The Microsoft together with partner will create this demand, or will look through if the customer is fitting to this program, to this solution. Then Microsoft will do some parts by themselves together with the customer doing all the data collection analytics side, and after that together with partners we will introduce you this to you, and then you can decide how to move on. This is more like detailed and specific solution assessment. One thing is you can run it with Azure Migrate, but if it's more complex system, more bigger system, enterprise environment, then maybe it's reasonable to involve Microsoft together with partner to do this assessment for you. They're using some third-party tools that otherwise it will cost you quite a lot. but then it's for free for you. Then if you have those kinds of complex systems, customers who want to move to Azure but don't know where to start, or they want to start migrating their infrastructure databases, the Windows Server SQL is end of life or whatever. So then just turn to your partner, turn to us, to Primand, and we will look this through together with Microsoft. And what next? Yeah, if you want to contact with Primand, then you will definitely find those contact information from our website in English, in Latvian, Lithuanian, and Estonian. Just write us or give us a call, then we will help you to do the assessment and migration process. All right, there is 2 questions. Time is almost over, but quick questions for Sergey. Can those different assessments run in parallel, or do we have to do them sequentially?
Yeah, they can run in parallel. So you can create them right one after each other, and they will start in the background.
Mm-hmm. The second question, is it possible to migrate back to on-prem after 1-2 months after migration to Azure? For example, VMs and SQL databases. For example, if business tells that Azure is too expensive or the latency is unacceptable. If you are migrating them to Azure, I think, what's the process to migrate them back? Is it same kind of process?
It's definitely possible, but yeah, these tools have for VMs, of course. Yeah, you can, for VMs, you can export the VHDX file from Azure and move it back to your on-prem environment. So, of course, if you have VMware, you would need to convert this VHDX format to VMDK using some third-party tool, or VMware converter, for example. So yeah, it will involve some tasks by just getting this virtual disk file back to your on-prem environment. And for SQL, let's see if this tool can migration. This particular tool, yeah, it's not intended for migrating from Azure SQL back to regular SQL, but I guess you can use either a SQL Management Studio or Azure Data Studio to create some kind of backups of these SQL databases. But of course, it also depends which solution you select in Azure. Is it this SQL database or managed instances? So,
okay,
there can be some,
It's doable, but maybe not so straightforward as moving to
the
cloud to move it back. But I tell you, let's look this through, and after the webinar ends, we will send all the information together with the recordings to all the participants, and let's say send some information about that also. What are the options to move back from cloud to on-premises? Very interesting questions, actually.
I just taken a look at from Azure, there is a possibility from SQL Management Studio to export data from this database. So yeah, probably it should be technically possible.
Mm-hmm. All right, so thank you everyone for participating. If you have any more questions, just find our contacts from the website and let us know, and we can help you with assessment and migrations. Thank you, and take care.
Bye.
Bye.